A courtroom. Not a modern one with fluorescent lights and stenographers. An ancient one. The kind where the verdict is not determined by a jury, but by a law older than any nation on earth. The defendant is every human being who has ever lived. The charge is treason against the creator of the universe. The evidence is overwhelming, and the penalty is death. Now here is the question that has haunted philosophers, skeptics, and believers for 2,000 years. If God is all-powerful, if God is love, if God can do anything, why couldn't he simply forgive? Why did someone have to die? Why did it have to be his own son? Why couldn't the creator of the universe just wave his hand and declare the debt canceled? Most people who ask this question have never been shown the answer. Not because the answer doesn't exist, but because the answer is buried deep in the architecture of the Old Testament. In a legal and sacrificial system that most modern Christians treat as ancient religious background noise. Today, we are going to excavate that architecture. We are going to walk from the Garden of Eden to the book of Leviticus, to the prophet Isaiah, to the night of the Passover. And by the time we reach the cross, you are going to understand not just that Jesus died, but why the death of Jesus was the only logical, necessary, and just solution to the oldest problem in human history. This is not a simple answer, but it is a true one. And it begins not with theology. It begins with a courtroom. And the first question any courtroom asks is this: what is the law? In the beginning, God made a world and called it good. He placed a man and a woman in a garden and gave them one prohibition, one boundary, one law. Genesis 2:17. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. This was not an arbitrary rule. It was a covenant, a binding agreement between the Creator and his creatures, with a clearly stated penalty. The moment that fruit was eaten, the covenant was broken, and something happened in the universe that could not simply be undone by a word. Not because God lacked the power, but because God's own character, his justice, his truthfulness, his holiness, was now bound up in what happened next. Here is the principle that runs like a spine through the entire Old Testament. God is not only loving, he is also just. And justice, by definition, requires that what is declared to be wrong is treated as wrong. A judge who simply overlooks a crime is not merciful. He is corrupt. He has abandoned the law. And the God who made the universe cannot contradict himself. He cannot declare sin to be death and then treat it as nothing. The Hebrew word for this is chesed, paired with emet, steadfast love and faithfulness, two attributes that must hold together. The moment God ignores his own declared penalty, his word means nothing. His law means nothing, and the entire moral fabric of the universe unravels. So the problem is not that God is unwilling to forgive. The problem is that genuine forgiveness that does not destroy the law, requires that the penalty be paid. Someone must bear the weight. The question is, who? For centuries after Eden, God began to teach humanity this logic through a system, a costly, bloody, daily, relentless system. The sacrificial system of Israel. And most people today look at Leviticus with its detailed instructions for burnt offerings and sin offerings and guilt offerings and treat it as ancient barbarism. They are missing the point entirely. Every sacrifice in the Old Testament was a lesson, a visual aid written in blood. When a man in ancient Israel sinned, he did not simply pray and move on. He took an animal, a lamb, a goat, a bull, an animal that was unblemished, without defect, the best of the flock. He laid his hand on its head, and the priests taught that this act was a transfer. The guilt of the worshiper was symbolically placed on the animal, and then the animal died, in the place of the one who deserved to die. Leviticus 17:11 states the principle plainly. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it for you on the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that makes atonement by the life. Atonement. The Hebrew word is kafar. It means to cover, to wipe away, to cancel a debt, not to ignore it, not to pretend it did not happen, but to satisfy the penalty so completely that the record is clean. Blood for blood, life for life. The penalty is not waived, it is absorbed. But there was a problem, and the writer of Hebrews in the New Testament identifies it precisely. Hebrews 10:4. For it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. Every sacrifice in the Old Testament was pointing forward. It was not the solution. It was the shadow of the solution. Because an animal cannot voluntarily take on human guilt. An animal has no moral standing. Its death can illustrate the principle, but it cannot satisfy the debt. The system was designed to make Israel feel the weight, to make them understand that sin costs something, that the wages of sin is death, and that substitution, an innocent dying in the place of the guilty, is the only mechanism by which the debt can be cleared without the law being broken. Then came the Passover, and the Passover is where the logic sharpens into something almost unbearable. The year is roughly 1446 BC. Israel is enslaved in Egypt. God has sent 9 plagues, and Pharaoh has not relented. The 10th and final plague is coming, the death of every firstborn in Egypt. God gives Israel specific instructions. Take a lamb, 1 year old, unblemished. On the 14th day of the month, slaughter it at twilight. Take the blood and apply it to the doorposts and the lintel of the house. And when the angel of death passes through Egypt, when he sees the blood on the door, he will pass over that house. The firstborn inside will live. Notice what God does not say. He does not say the Israelites are good enough to deserve protection. He does not say they have prayed hard enough. He does not say their moral record is clean. He says, when I see the blood, I will pass over. The only thing standing between life and death was the blood of a spotless lamb on the door. The judgment did not bypass those houses. It fell on the lamb. The lamb absorbed what the household deserved. And the family inside was protected not by their own merit, but by the death of a substitute. Paul, writing to the Corinthians, says it plainly. 1 Corinthians 5:7. Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. The entire Exodus event was a preview, a national-scale dramatization of the logic that would be enacted on a hill outside Jerusalem more than 1,000 years later. 700 years before Christ, the prophet Isaiah wrote something that the rabbis struggled to categorize. It was too specific, too graphic, too uncomfortable. Isaiah 53, a suffering figure, a servant who bears the sins of his people, not his own sins, theirs. Isaiah 53, 5-6. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. The Hebrew word laid is hipgia. It means to cause to strike, to make converge, to bring together in one place. God caused the iniquity of all people to converge on a single point, on a single person. Not because that person was guilty, but because the penalty required someone to bear it, and no one among the guilty was capable of bearing it on behalf of others. The solution required someone who was both fully human, so that the death was legally valid as a human penalty, and fully divine, so that the value of the sacrifice was infinite enough to cover the infinite debt. The suffering servant of Isaiah 53 is not a martyr. He is not a good man who died for a cause. He is an infinite being voluntarily entering the courtroom as a defendant, absorbing the full sentence and walking out the other side, having satisfied every requirement of the law. This is why Jesus had to die. not because God is bloodthirsty, not because ancient religion required human sacrifice, but because the moral logic of a universe governed by a just God required that the penalty for sin be paid by someone capable of paying it. God could not simply declare the debt canceled without destroying his own law. He could not send an animal to bear infinite guilt. He could not accept an ordinary human death as payment for the sins of all humanity. The only solution that satisfied every requirement, justice and mercy together, law and love in the same moment, was for God himself to enter the human condition and absorb the sentence from the inside. Romans 3:25-26 puts it with surgical precision. God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood to be received by faith. He did this to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance he had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. He did it to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time, so as to be just and the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus. Just and the justifier, both at the same time. That is the logic of the cross. The penalty was real. The death was real. The justice was satisfied. And the gift of life, given freely to everyone who receives it by faith, is not mercy that ignores the law. It is mercy that has already paid the law's full price. The temple curtain tore from top to bottom the moment Jesus died, not from the bottom up, as if a man had torn it, from the top down. 60 feet of heavy woven fabric, splitting open. That curtain had separated the holy place from the most holy place for 1,000 years. Only the high priest could pass through it, once a year, carrying blood for atonement. The moment it tore, God was saying, "It is finished. The final sacrifice has been made. The way is open. The debt is cleared." Not ignored, cleared. The question you are left with is not whether the logic holds. Read the Old Testament as a whole, and the logic is inescapable. From the first sacrifice in Eden, when God clothed Adam and Eve in animal skins, to the Passover lamb, to the daily burnt offerings in the tabernacle, to Isaiah's suffering servant, to Daniel's anointed one who would be cut off, every thread runs to the same place, to a cross, to a death, to a resurrection that proved the payment was accepted. The question is what you do with it. The verdict has been rendered. The penalty has been paid. The door has the blood on it. The only remaining question is whether you are inside or outside the house when the judgment passes through. If this has reframed everything you thought you knew about why Jesus died, press subscribe. We uncover the hidden logic of Scripture, and we are just getting started. Share this with one person who thinks the cross is just a symbol. It is not a symbol. It is a verdict, and the verdict is yours to receive.